Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Powerhouse Podcast. I am absolutely honored and delighted with my guest who is joining me in the ring today. He is truly a powerhouse in his own right, and I cannot wait for you to meet the legendary Jonathan Bender. So before we even get started and I tell you more about the show and we dig into the conversation, let me just say welcome and hello to Jonathan. So glad to have you joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We are going to have a really rich conversation, and I'm truly excited because, like always, we never know where the conversation is going to go. This is truly our space to have those big, open, courageous conversations, and remember that it's all about choosing leadership, as leadership is how you choose to show up, how you choose to serve others, and how you choose to take personal responsibility inside that space. So with that, let me tell you a little bit more about my amazing guest. Jonathan Bender is the creator of Connection Jams. He has been leading workshops and coaching for over 20 years and has led jams since 2015. He has coached and taught workshops to thousands, focusing on self-expression, public speaking, personal growth, and the performance of your life. I love that. The founder of Whole Speak LLC, he spends his time teaching you how to show up in life and on stage with authenticity, power, and a dynamic presence. Jonathan is also a professional theater director, actor, and writer, and holds an MFA in theater, contemporary performance, and a master's in performance studies and speech communication. Wow. Jonathan has an international following. Hundreds from around the world have taken his online trainings like Claim Your Voice. And this year, he is placing a strong focus on growing his work around healing the wounds of disconnection in this country and bringing together a common humanity. Wow. Just blown away with the work that you do. And again, it is such an honor to have you here. Can you talk a little bit about how your theater background plays into the space of you really helping people step into the performance of their life and unleashing their voice? And what does that mean? What does that really look like?
Which part? The unleashing your voice or the...
Both parts of it. Talk a little bit about both, whichever way you want to go.
Well, I think it might be helpful first to get a little context around what I mean when I talk about the performance of your life.
Awesome.
It kind of encapsulates everything. So basically, it's like we know that if we go see a movie, we watch TV, we see a play, that if people still go to the theater these days, we know we're going to be seeing typically performers, and they're going to be wearing costumes, and they're probably going to be using their bodies in a certain way and playing these characters, hopefully believably. And we often don't realize that we can also view our lives as a type of performance as well. Now, especially if you're focused on authenticity or like really bringing out your gifts and being yourself, you might not think of what you do as a performance. And at the same time, if we can start to think about that, well, let's see, what did performers do? They were trained. So they learned how to have a character speak and how they should dress and how they should move and how they think. They really have to try to make them think right, and what's their emotional landscape. And these are all things that we have been trained in from the time we were young. Now, this isn't trying to say there isn't any sort of like natural disposition or things that people bring, but largely is we have been taught through society how to gesture. We wear costumes as is appropriate for the occasion. We have chosen to groom ourselves and to appear in certain ways, and we have a particular emotional makeup, things that we want and may be different from our siblings or other people who are close to us, and yet has a certain commonality in terms of society. And if we start to think about life is a performance, then we can start to think about what are the things I'm doing that I'm performing that actually work in my favor? What are the patterns that don't work, which could be anything from a mindset, the way that we think, like, or the way we are self-critical, that pretty much everyone is. And then we can start to retrain that to get different types of performance training. And now I look at this very tangibly. So for myself, I do have that big theater background. I've been doing it since I was a teenager, and these days I'm a little more interested in the performance of your life than I am in terms of actual performance, but I still do things here and there. And I guess the reason why I came up with this idea of the performance of your life was twofold, is that I was very, very shy and introverted when I was young. and very disempowered and did not have a voice pretty much. For whatever reasons, how it was. I was bullied for many, many years, pretty much grades 1 through 12, and pretty severely, especially 1st through 8th. And when I started doing theater in high school, it gave me an avenue to start to find my own voice and to find out who I was and to give me permission to be able to express that in front of other people. Now, I was still pretty shy in my life as well. And I think that it was also being on a deep growth path since I was pretty young as well, that it was this process, not just of learning the outer skills of performance and learning to be free and to be able to play and have fun, but then inner work to find that inner freedom. And so that's really what my work combines, so that we can see how we've been performing in ways that perhaps isn't who we'd like to be in the future, and how we want to shift that to be able to step more into our full essence and to do, as you said, to kind of unleash our voices.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful. And I think, we don't think about the fact that our life is a performance, right? And I like the analogy you use around we put on different costumes depending on the environment that we're going to play in or the way that we're going to show up and who we're going to engage with. And I guess I never thought about it that way, but it's really, it's such a powerful analogy. And so I'm curious, as you've been really delving in this space for so many years, and you've really brought in this essence of, theater and performance into how you coach and how you help people really stand in their own authenticity. What's been some of the biggest, challenges that people face when, to use your word, trying to find that avenue to find their voice? What is the thing or things that tend to be the blocks or the barriers from people really stepping into that space from the work that you've done?
There are a bunch of them. Let me just go off on one of them for a moment, which is that sometimes when people hear performance, they start to get concerned about this idea of authenticity.
Mm.
And because they're like, well, I want to be authentic to who I am, we don't actually move forward, because I view authenticity with some nuance. I have a kind of a whole video I call the authenticity trap, which is a bit of a segue, but in that if it's really, I think, being authentic to who we were.
Mm-hmm.
Not to who we can be. And so people often can hold themselves back by trying to be too authentic. And now this doesn't mean be fake. Like my work is all about authenticity, but it's all about alignment and feeling into like what is really true for who we are, and where do I face those fears? Because it can be authentic to you to stay in a small box and to not grow to the next level, because it's going to be habitual. So sometimes people, when I'm teaching them different exercises, is they say, well, that's not natural, meaning to like use different types of body language or facial expressions or make people like my voice. I know I have a resonant voice. I've had a lot of training in that. I trained people in this as well, quite a lot, out of a richer voice. And they say, well, that's not authentic. That's not authentic. That's not natural. I say, no, it's not habitual. And most people are not communicating from their full self-expression. We learn to mute ourselves. And I think this is one of the things that holds people back, is we learn to function in a muted version of ourselves, where we use like the smaller version of our voice, and we kind of hold our energy in tight and we play small, and we don't realize that that's actually just something that we've been trained in, the performance training that we've had in our lives. And it's very possible then, like through the techniques, to be able to burst out of that, to find a greater level of expression, great level of comfort zone, and a greater level of possibility, which starts to redefine our whole like sense of ourselves and what we can do in this life.
That absolutely blows my mind. Thinking about the fact, there's a couple things that you said that I really want to dig into a little bit. And first, coming back to this space of, it can be authentic when you feel you're playing small, being that there's that difference between natural and habitual and things that we've learned in that space. And I think what we don't realize is, even though it's a learned behavior and it feels like it's authentic to who we are, it doesn't mean it's allowing us to step into our full potential. And this idea of what you said around having a muted voice, I think that's so powerful, because I've seen it even while you do performance training. I've seen it sometimes even in helping people tap into their physical power, because I do box and I do MMA, and I've had, especially women, but even men, where I've simply held up a bag to them and said, I want you to hit this. and they'll kind of do it from a very withdrawn, very small space. And it's not until you get them really tapped into something that forces them to channel it, that all of a sudden the first time they make that connection with the bag, it's like this epiphany happens. And they didn't even realize they had that power within them. And I would imagine, as you talk about working with people to tap into this space of having a muted voice, I mean, what a powerful frame that is, to think about. That's a performance technique we've learned in probably all of the boxes and the shoulds and the things that go on around us around, well, you can't be too big, you can't be too forceful. I get the same thing that you do. I have a very deep resonating voice, and I, in any given room, do not need to project more. I usually need to pull it back a little, right? And so what happens, what's kind of the epiphanies that you've seen when people give themselves that permission to do the work, to step in and really unlock or unleash that voice that may have been muted for 20, 30, 50 years? What's the shift that happens? What's the epiphany that you see with the people that you work with?
Often when people start off, there's a way in which we get locked up. And so this shows up in terms of sometimes like tight bodily tension, or some people will have vocal things that happen, and it could be vocal strain, it could be getting a high voice, maybe they have nerves that come up. And by the way, there's a lot of like coaches for public speaking who just say, well, you always feel the fear, and it's just part of dealing with it. And I think that those people are bad coaches, that that they don't have a 95% success rate with that, even with people who take my online trainings. And so it's like that there's is that that you have to have the right guidance. And let me just segue briefly and say that. And
Agreed.
I have been doing this for a long time in 2 graduate degrees, and I've created my own method. And that if you're not getting results, if you're working with a coach, or you've tried it before, you've tried Toastmasters or something, it just means that you need real guidance. And so in terms of getting from A to B, or that transformation space, you have to have the right guidance, and it also takes time. It's not an instant process. So, but like, so when someone comes to me and they either have the nervousness, or they don't know how to craft a talk in a way that's true, real, authentic, and isn't manipulative, because there are a lot of speaking coaches also where it's like cheesy and manipulative. And when they've been taught that, I think, well, they've never learned communication theory. They've learned what they've done from another coach. And so I'm kind of insistent in saying you need good coaching and guidance. So what's possible when that happens, and that you've taken the time to really learn, you've gone that stage of when you start off with, like you said, of learning to hit the bag, and that you can do that, learning how to put your force, that takes time typically for most people to learn how to do that. And the same thing with opening up your voice and expression. So what I found is that within 2 to 3 months, is that first of all, through the aspects that I teach, the inner critic vastly diminishes, that it's about changing your relationship with yourself. And we have to learn to be kind to ourselves as we move forward. And especially when we want to go to another level, that's especially when all of our stuff comes up.
Right.
And so how do we be kind to ourselves rather than beating ourselves up? And so they learn that. They also learn how to unlock their expression, to step into a place of confidence and presence. So something I can say about presence, which is pretty much everyone who works with me gets, is that it's not something you have or you don't. That presence is a skill set. And that as you learn to get really relaxed, you learn to connect with yourself, you learn how to connect with others more, you create more presence. Presence I also define as the art of being present. So they learn to be in their bodies, like to be like really here, because the rest of the world wants us to be somewhere else. They want us to be on our phones, or they want us to be freaked out about whatever is happening in the world, or do what they want. But that physical presence, that open emotional presence, emotional connection, the mental presence, is that when we learn that, is that we start to live life differently. And people find a greater sense of awareness, of peace, and they start to change other people by just their presence of how they walk into a room. And so often we want other people to give us permission to be ourselves. And instead is that if we walk around like with a fuller presence and giving permission and inspiring other people, then that actually shifts the entire game.
Yeah, and it's exactly what I was thinking. That's such a game changer, right? And we think so many times it's either we're in this space where we're overly distracted and think we're trying to be present in too many spaces instead of starting with the presence within ourselves first. And I think everything that you're talking about is, what we talk a lot about, it's around saying yes to yourself. It's that opportunity to give yourself permission and the openness to say, I want to step into something that's bigger than what I've always known. The part that really stands out in what you said amongst all that is the fact that presence is a skill set. It's not because, people say, a lot of times I think we use things that are such a cop out in terms of how we choose to show up or how we don't, because we're like, oh, that person just has natural presence. And what we don't realize is it's a skill set that they've been honing because they've allowed themselves to step up with confidence. And all of those things start with how you feel about yourself, what you tap into for yourself. And so I think it's interesting that you talk about, what you're talking about is really changing a mindset first. And I think people always want that golden nugget or that golden ticket that says, what's the quick fix that I can get over this hurdle? And as you're talking about this is such a process. It's a process to keep pushing yourself. And so the other thing that I really like, and I want to talk about this more from your own personal perspective, is you talked about it really does matter around the quality of who you're having help guide you. And not all coaches, and it's one of the myths that I like to dispel, is the fact that not all coaches are the same. Not all people that are in the space of what we do are truly qualified to serve you. And if you're not taking ownership to ask the right questions, too, and one of the questions I always ask, and I'm going to ask you this as someone who I know is such a thought leader and is such a person who is constantly pushing themselves into the next level. One of the questions I tell people, I say, whether or not you're looking at me as a coach or not, one of the first questions you need to ask somebody is, what are they doing for their own personal development and growth? What investments are they making? What studies, what are they doing to continue to invest in themselves so that as you're growing, they can keep helping you grow because they're growing as well. And so I'm curious, Jonathan, as we talk about this, what are some of the things you do to constantly keep that edge for your game, to constantly increase your performance in terms of how you're showing up in your life? Where do you invest that, either time, money, energy, resources? How do you invest? What does that look like for you?
Oh gosh. I've been on a growth path for over 30 years, and I think that I find that is often more important than the outer business strategy. A conversation I've had with many business coaches, and I used to do that as part of my practice for a few years, then I kind of decided I didn't want to anymore. So, but is that often it's not having the right strategy that holds people back. It's the inner work,
Mm-hmm.
and that having the right support, the right community is really important, and the right guidance. And so for me, sometimes it's being in the right community, joining a fantastic mastermind group and people who I can really work with. I'm also I've been on a strong spiritual path for a very, very long time, and since I was 14 as well. So with that, it's like I work with a spiritual teacher and I go to retreats there, and spend quite a lot of money and time, but also and practicing not just daily, but throughout the day. And it's like integrating practices into my whole life with pretty much to catch myself. And I'll just say is that the reason why I like this particular path that I'm on, which is a bit of a long story, but is that it's not just about trying to like be spiritual or be somewhere else. It's about living on earth as a joyful, kind, loving, aware being.
Right.
Various practices to bring that out. And so and that can be challenging because when stuff comes up or you get that weird phone call or I just found out I had identity theft.
Oh,
um,
wow.
and where someone put in submitted a 1040 in my name. and
Ouch.
and and so all right, so then I had things to do about that, and I needed to get a bank account, I needed this and that,
Right.
and but it didn't phase me at all, because I'm committed to being joyful and loving and aware, and it doesn't mean I never get triggered or pissed or but the but overall, the more that I am committed to having my own embodiment and presence and awakening, the more that things are simply easy and roll off my back. So that's a big part of it. And then I also will work with coaches to improve my work as well. I just finished planning the whole rollout for my connection work that I'm doing for this year, and just finished the last session for working with a coach for like about 10 months now. And so we just finished that yesterday. So it's like I'm probably invest like 10 to 15,000 a year in terms of my own growth, very roughly. But it's what's needed. It's not about the money. It's about having the right things. And
Right.
a high level coach doesn't mean they're a better coach. And so you have to see who you resonate with and who can help you.
Yeah.
Sometimes, interestingly, I just say is people end up spending more at like $100 an hour beginner level coach because they don't know what they're doing. So that it takes them a lot longer, and they spend longer rather than kind of a little more intensive work with someone who's a more higher level.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is, it is all about your inner work. And the fact that, as you said, it's a growth path. It's this continual journey that we have the opportunity to step into. And I know you and I have the privilege, it's how we know each other, playing in some of those communities and getting to mastermind together and doing some of those things. And it is really that combination of knowing what you need at any given moment and finding the person that's going to help move you forward in that space. And to your point, it's not necessarily about a higher coach or a different, it's about who you resonate with, especially with where you're at, and having that ownership. The other thing that's so powerful in what you said was really that power of choice, that you talk about how you're choosing to show up as an individual, how you're choosing to show up as a leader, so that even when life throws the curveballs, which it happens, there are things that are meant to challenge us, to help us step up and continue that practice that you talk about around being kind and compassionate and being in a loving space that says, I'm not going to let that deter me. The thing I hope people really hear inside of that is the choice you're making to show up that way. It's not something that you just go, okay, I'm good, I'm done. It's a constant choice to show up and say, do I want to allow this to get me off centered? Because we all have triggers. It's human nature. Or do I want to focus in this space that's going to allow me to serve better and allow me to step up better and allow me to stay more aligned? And to go back to that alignment piece you talked about, stay more aligned in the congruency and authenticity of who I really am and who I am choosing to be versus where I was, which I do think, and that was something you mentioned earlier, I do think a lot of people look back far too much than looking forward to say, yes, and that got me where I needed to be. And right now I can make a different decision to say my authenticity really looks like this,
Right.
And choose to step in a different place, right?
Absolutely. And something I feel called to also add to that is that you can be loving and joyful and compassionate and profitable.
Yes. Amen to that. Amen.
Yeah, is that it doesn't mean somehow compassionate doesn't mean that you are giving away your work or not charging well, or but it's and it allows you to decide ethically if you change your rates for something or make exceptions. But it's about, for me, it's like, how do we become the presence that's going to change people and to change people's lives and change the planet? And that's what inspires people to work with us. They feel us and they say, wow, I want to work with you. It's not something I'll mention about that is neuro-linguistic programming, for people who know that, NLP, and there's a lot of speaking techniques for that. And I hear people and there's some really great stuff with NLP, but there's an aspect of establishing rapport that I don't like. And that it's like, oh, if someone's doing this, then you also do this.
Oh, mirror everything. Yes.
Right. Mirroring, or these different things that's manipulative. And I don't think that's, I think, a part of presence is that people don't want just like them. They want to be inspired to be even more. And we actually do that mirroring and things like that without realizing it a lot of the time. So just trust you're doing that, but then look at, how do I have that level of presence that is going to be inspiring to people and the awakening. And when we have even more of ourselves, people think, wow, I want to know who that is. And I get clients sometimes, honestly, when people say, to my workshops, so I just meet randomly, and they've said, I don't know who you are, what you do, but I want to work with you. And it's not very often. I'm not trying to say I'm like it's often like, really? I was kind of having a crappy day.
Well, and it's interesting. And I love that you added that, because I have to remind myself, and we get in our own head like anybody else. It just happens. And there's days where I'm like, man, that wasn't my A game at all in my mind. And I will have exactly that. Somebody who blows my mind that says, oh my God, Candy, I feel like you were just talking to me. I feel you. I don't know what this looks like. I need you. And I'm like, really? Because I was thinking I was at a B minus today. And what you realize is it's not about you, it's about how people receive you. And so I've noticed that sometimes, even when I'm not as polished or I'm tripping over things, it's not about, and I love, and I quote this always, I love the quote from Maya Angelou that says, people will not remember what you said, people will not remember what you did, they will only remember how you made them feel. And I think we miss the opportunity to realize how much human connection happens. And I love that everything you talk about is connections. And I want to talk about this next step that's coming up for you, this kind of bigger imaginative space and this connections that you're starting to really dig into. But it is that space around connections happen when we really are present and feel and experience that other person. And we talk about legacy as if it's something on the way out. Legacy is this thing we leave in every moment we interact, engage, and connect with another human being, and even with ourselves. You and I are creating legacy just in having this conversation, because someone listening is going to take something and move that forward for themselves. And what's so astounding to me about that is we don't know who. We don't know who, we don't know how, we don't know to what level someone can be affected simply by us showing up. And that idea of presence and feeling, it's kind of like making yourself that lighthouse so that the people that need to find you and see you and feel you are so attracted to you for no other reason than, I just knew I had to be here. And I think that's so beautiful. It's one of the reasons I feel so deeply connected to you. We've been like that since we've met. You feel your presence. I mean, you just have this way of drawing in, and you and I have very different energies, yet there's this really gentle way that it kind of, and I love, love, love spending time with you. And so I really love that you added that piece around that, feeling it, and that you can be profitable in that space. It's all of it.
And what you just said reminded me of a couple of points I'd like to make that might be helpful. Is that, like, on one hand, like, we can't really know the impact that we make on people and how they are received, how we're received, and we can think, oh, we did a crappy job, and so that could be totally off, like you said. And on the other hand, is it can be difficult to read other people. And I think this is when you asked before, like, what are the mistakes of how we hold people ourselves back, or those blocks, is that when the connection is off in one way or another. And this is a very large topic of different ways it can be off, but one in particular is if we're not reading others properly. And so I'll give an example. So in terms of my theater work, one of my specialties has been solo shows. And so I had one man show that had 9 characters, and it's just me on stage for an hour, and it was a lot of movement, and it was a big thing. And so I toured that all around. And sometimes these were in smaller theaters, like a 49 or 99 seat theater, and where the audience is really close. And so I remember one particular performance where I was like giving it my all, and there were like these 2 teenage boys sitting in the front row, like just a couple of feet really from me, and they were just like shifting around, like it sucks. Like I'm just, I just feel like the energy drained out of me, and I did a talk back after every show, where I would talk with the audience and find out the impact on them. It was kind of a controversial topic, and it turned out that I was dreading this. It's like, oh, I'm going to stay, and they're like, and then afterwards they said they talked about specific things that was really moving and powerful for them, and I was like, oh. You liked it. You were into it. You're just like teenage boys. You squirm around. That's just who you are. And my reading was totally off of them. And so
that's so on point, though, because I tell, being a speaker, and that I've warned other speakers, I'm like, look, that person that's because I'm that person when I'm listening, I get that resting, face that just kind of, and I look really intense and angry, and I'm just concentrating. And I've noticed those people in the audience where you're like, man, that person's so checked out. And they will be the first one in line telling me that I changed their life and that they love me. And I'm like, wow, I so did not read that when I was looking out. And we do that all the time.
Totally. And this is the same, like I was in competitive speaking for many years in high school and college. I coached the high school and college teams, had state national champions for that. And that's how I really started my coaching career. And so I remember, like, in college, when I would, be competing intensively, and I would, usually there's an audience there, but occasionally you're just face to face with just a judge, and there's something only. And I remember sometimes there would be a judge who would be like, "Wow, they were really encouraging, yeah," and then I get my ballots back, like last place. It was like encouraging. And then someone else would be like looking at me like, I'm like, "Oh God, I'm sucking," and then it gave me first place. Like, this is the most amazing speech I've ever seen.
Right.
And like, it's just like it's 8 a.m. They're tired, or they're just there. Who knows?
That's just their look when they're into something that's going on, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to say is that, like, yeah, we can't. We should be nice to ourselves, but we also have to be ready to make the best impression. So, but like for when I would do that one man show, it's an hour long, and I would warm up for a full hour before I would go on stage. And I have to, like, in terms of like really getting myself ready. Now, it's the same thing that if you're going to a networking event, if you're doing speaking, most people have no idea how to warm up or how to really get themselves ready. And this is something that happens for like a lot of people with speaking, is that they're not prepared because they don't know how to warm up. Their idea of how to warm up is they're like, okay, let me see. They're like muttering around, like looking at, and they don't know that you have to get yourself physically ready, vocally ready, emotionally ready to be seen, to be naked, to be vulnerable, to encounter the moment. All of those things you can warm up. And so that you can really give your best, including be nice to yourself if things go wrong or they perceive them as going wrong, and some more mind stuff around that. But so, like, get yourself ready, be kind to yourself, be like prepared to really be on and to be open and present to that moment no matter what happens, so you can handle that. That's one of the secrets, by the way, of confidence for speaking, is that you have to be able to handle anything that happens, because anything will.
Yes.
That's something
Well,
I
and that's part of the preparation, right? And I love this idea of preparing to perform and the preparation, because I know, and we all have our ceilings we create for ourselves, or the upper limits when we go into different things, especially if it's a big new space to network. And I don't care if you're extroverted or introvert, we all have the talk. And I can remember going into a talk, which was some very high profile, high powered executive women. And I was in my car. I'm like, what the heck am I doing? And oh my God. And then I remember because I have an IM app that throws some, things out. And for whatever reason, I looked at my phone and it said, I am powerful. And I did exactly what you're talking about. I took that time to prepare, to get myself. And well, here's what happened. The screen was too small. The projector didn't work. I couldn't even use the slide deck that I had brought. Couldn't do anything. And it was one of the best performances or best opportunities I had, because I got to ditch all that. I had the confidence going in, and I got to serve and communicate to these women on a level that more than 60% of that room converted and did my workshop afterwards. It was one of those. And had I shown up originally as I had planned, I guarantee that wouldn't have been the end result. And so it was very important to have that space to say, I'm prepared for what could go well, and I'm prepared for life throwing a curveball, because it always does. And it gets you out of that space of where I really push people to let go of the attachment to the outcome and let go of how, when, and why something is happening. It's more about, am I showing up from the best place with the best intention, from the best space within myself to offer that authenticity and that performance that you're talking about. And I think that's so powerful and beautiful that you acknowledge that.
Well, it's an essential skill that I teach, is that presence is also being present to whatever is happening. And if there's anything I've learned over the years, is that when something is live, something will go differently than you expect, because it's live. It's not a video, it's not a movie, you can't control it. And something will be different, and you just have no idea what that's going to be. And so, and that's really about being connected to what is happening in that moment. And that you say, this is what's happening, and where some like speakers and things go wrong, if they try to pretend it's not happening, or they're not reading the audience. Like, well, I had my script planned out exactly like this, and this part I was going to do high energy, and it's all planned, and that's actually not what's happening. And then you're disconnected from the audience. And so you have to read them, to tune in to an audience, to a conversation one-on-one, is like, what is actually happening right then, and then how do you work with that?
Yeah. And you need that freedom and flexibility in the framework. I'm all for creating a framework of how you intend to show up and what you're trying to have come across, and be flexible so that you're managing energy. And I mean, I know you do this as well. And people say, I constantly, I've had people that have seen me multiple times that are sort of the people that come back a lot. And they'll go, Candy, I've seen you 6 times and I've seen you put the same things up in front of people and you've got the same talking points, yet I've never ever once seen you be the same. And I said, because never ever once has it been the exact same audience or the exact same day or the exact same way the moon is shifting or the exact same. It's never, I can never duplicate that exact moment if I'm being present to what's needed in that space. And it's those moments where I feel like the best presence comes when I hear someone say, Candy, can you repeat that? And my response is, I hope someone else can tell you what I said, because I'm being so present to what was needed in this moment that I'm just channeling through whatever came down. Because like you, that spiritual path that just says, look, this is what was needed. I'm simply the vessel or the projection to put that out. I have no idea what I just said.
Yeah. Well, and the same time with that also is, I just want to make sure people know, is that structure is really important. It's
Yes.
not just wing it. It's that, like, if you're doing a talk, there are particular ways to put together your talk that are going to be more effective and more powerful. And yet there's also having some wiggle room or flexibility. And there's something that I learned when I was doing my graduate training in theater, where we would be, in these productions that we would do, it's like you're tightly choreographed. Everything is exactly the same. And we have these big ensemble casts doing these amazing things. And yet there, we talked about this idea of freedom within structure. That
Mm-hmm.
when you have structure and you know how to work within that, it provides freedom, as opposed to like, what am I going to do today? If you have no idea, then you might have your day off and feel lost and bored because you don't know what you're going to do.
Right.
Some structure is good, and then you want to be able to play within that to be responsive to that moment.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. As someone who doesn't like a lot of rules, I am very clear about needing systems and structure to organize and create the discipline, and then having a lot of flexibility. The other thing is, the more you practice, to your point, you create that space for practice, you create that space for preparation, you're also then more able to be flexible in the framework, because now you've got the confidence that says, I know how to shift this if something happens. I know that, because you have all the components, and it's more of, you can kind of pull which one you want down when you need it, versus scrambling and going, oh my gosh, this is way out of my range. And
Right.
so I think all of what you're talking about plays into creating greater flexibility. Sometimes you need to get it a little bit more structured and organized first before you can allow yourself too much freedom,
Right.
because you need to build the confidence and the consistency first.
Right. And also the practice, because for some people, they just go on tangents and their time is lost. So you have to kind of know, great, I'm teaching a 2-hour workshop, or I am doing this talk, and it's this long, and I know that I need to cover these things in here. And so if I go on too long, I'm going to sacrifice a whole other thing. And sometimes this happens that they give so much, they leave no time to make an offer.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do you put that together in a way that's of service to everyone the most? And that does take some experience to do that.
Absolutely. And so I'm curious, because you've got some new things that are in the works and some new stages that you're starting to perform on as we talk about the performance of life. What's on the horizon for you? What's if you start to think about your next level of growth, and as we like to call it, the imagine the possibilities space. And I love that you're starting to look at how to create healing around the wounds of disconnection and bringing common humanity together. What does that really mean, and what does that look like for you in the very near next?
Yeah. So I got really obsessed with connection a number of years ago. First, of like, what does it mean to really connect with an audience, and do the things we've been talking about here for a
Mm-hmm.
bit. And also I started teaching networking back in 2010, because every time I went to a networking event, it was dreadful. So I applied these techniques to that, and to help people like get inspired and authentic and down to earth. And it also is really productive and it's fun. And that led all of that into creating a body of work called The Path to Connection. And this is something I'm working on a book on, and that it's a particular framework for looking at what connection is, where it goes wrong, and then how to kind of diagnose that and to change that. And I just think that like people are just spending like way too much time staring at their phones, and And that if you're like in a city and on the subway, it's like who actually turns next to each other? How's it going?
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're like you're on your phone, I'm on my phone, and that we're more likely to have conflict if there is some sort of interaction, if not just like polite, basic, like sorry, excuse me, if you actually say that, and that we have not just, of course, like liberals fighting with conservatives, but liberals fighting with liberals because they're just slightly different, and that
Right.
there has to be room for difference. So the work on, I'll just say, of the path to connection is first, how do we connect with ourselves? And a lot of the practices that I teach for other things translate into like stay connected with yourself. These are the same things we use to find presence, is really being present to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we not lose that? And then it goes into interconnection. So there's interconnection and then interconnection. So how do we really tune into each other to receive people, receive an audience, receive the person we're
Right.
talking to, receive our loved ones, and then how do we impact with intention? And so this is kind of a framework and a whole body of work. And I do these events called connection jams, and which are I don't know if you've been to one or not.
I have not. I have it in my forecast as I must do.
They're super fun and like
Oh, I
lots
can
of,
imagine.
and I adapt them both. Like sometimes I'm brought into more formal organization, like, well, we don't really have much room for movement, so people are in suits, what can we do? So all right, so we'll adapt it. But it's a lot of movement and play and just like
Awesome.
dialogue of how to really be curious, and it kind of starts to heal us from these societal scripts that we've learned, and what do you do in a way that kind of close things down, and like, oh, I have to figure out the right way to say that, or here's my script that I've memorized, maybe you want to work with me. So it's like how to break down these things that we've learned so that we can be real and to have that sense of belonging and closeness. So I do those. So what's not for me is I am forming my own podcast right now, which I'm finalizing the title at the
Yay.
moment. So that's coming soon, and I'll also be having an online gathering at some point this summer as well. For you could call it an online conference or summit. I prefer to call it a
I
gathering.
like the gathering.
And with different like speakers and a place to learn. I'll also be moving into training facilitators in this work of connection as well, and that people can apply to their own workshops, to their to their own lives, inappropriate for someone who works with individuals. So just how do you help people like connect with themselves and find each other in a deeper way? So
Yeah.
that's kind of a bit of what I'm really dedicated to doing this year.
I love it. I love, there's such power in connections. And I'm with you. I think we're so distracted and so disengaged and not in a space. And I get people that they think it's funny because I say, you don't realize the opportunities of things that can open up simply by saying hello and being really present with somebody. And I said, I've literally, and I mean this, I mean, it's a little tongue in cheek, but I'm also very clear. I've gotten a client from saying hello to someone in the bathroom. I've had clients off the airplane. I've had new friends. Because you never know where your next opportunity for growth in whatever area opening. Every person you meet has something to offer into your life, even if it's just a moment of insight or a moment of curiosity or a moment of something. And I love that you're doing this work. It's one of the reasons we talk about having courageous connected conversations, because I feel like we've created a culture that's all about complaining and commiserating. It's who can outsuck who has become our metric of a success. My life sucks so bad. Oh no, wait, mine sucks more. Instead of deeply having an open conversation that really allows you to be vulnerable and authentic and real. And so love and can't wait to hear more of what you've got going on in this space, because I know it's going to be absolutely fabulous. And I know there's some people right now that are getting very curious in terms of what real connections might look like them, or how to maybe go through the process with you to understand their own authenticity, to step into that place, to actually unmute their voice, and to start really looking at maybe a higher level performance in their own life. What are the best ways people can reach out to start to engage in that connection with you?
Okay, so first of all, something that I would recommend is I have a free online course that I think is really helpful as a good starting place. And it's specifically around issues around confidence, around presence, and authenticity. So it's called Your True Voice, How to Speak with Confidence and Presence. And you can go to it, yourtruevoice.org. And I have a lot on authenticity in there. And it's a very good place. When you learn that, you'll start to hear about events that I have coming up as well. So that
Awesome.
is one thing to do, yourtruevoice.org. I will have I'm retooling some of my work on connection. So I think that you can check if it's up if you go to connectionjams.com. I think that is ready now, so you can double check that. And I also just want to say I love doing workshops and stuff within organizations, and I do a very small amount of high-end coaching. I don't do a lot of private clients, but I love working with organizations too. People are welcome to reach out to me personally as well. Should I give my email or?
Sure, that'd be great. Best way if you want people to reach out.
Yeah, so Jonathan at theperformanceofyourlife.com is the
Awesome.
easiest way. So JONATHAN at theperformanceofyourlife.com.
Yeah, it's Jonathan with 2 A's.
Yeah,
Not
me,
a no.
JONA, and then A at the end. So,
Yeah.
so you're welcome to do that as well, and I do my best to respond as timely as I can with my schedule. So, but please do reach out if that's something that I can. If you'd like to ask any questions, or can be of service for you or your organization.
Awesome. Well, first, let me just say just a deep gratitude and appreciation for who you are and for you taking time to carve out a little space to have this conversation with me today. I adore you. I am so just honored that we get to play in spaces together, and it's just been a blessing. So thank you for being on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to see you and to be here and to contribute. And I hope that people have got some good stuff that they can take away to start finding that level of performance that is their bigger, truer self, to make an even bigger difference and impact that I think the world is really needing and waiting for.
Yeah. And so if there was one last thing you'd want to leave this audience with, what might it be?
Well, I think the last thing I just said wasn't bad, but
no, it wasn't. It was fantastic.
I would just say is that you are more than you think you are, and that's that process of like discovery and wondering like what is even possible, and choosing to start to play even more and play as a path of discovery into who you are and what you do, and really to remember that if you get held back, that the world truly needs your work, and to follow that and to trust that.
Oh, so beautiful. And I love how the power of play shows up so much as a path for your own discovery. And as you all know, it is your opportunity to truly say yes to yourself. And it starts with you giving yourself that permission to play, to be curious, to go out and stretch. Because as we talked about, you don't know who, you don't know how, and you don't know to what level you can affect, influence, or impact change for another person simply by showing up. And so with that, it has been such an honor having you all join us today. I hope you take some really good nuggets that you can start to implement and put into your life. And so with that, we will catch up with you next time. Thank you again, Jonathan, for joining us. It has been an honor.
My pleasure. Thanks, Candy.
So we'll catch up with y'all next time. Thanks.